Thank you, Mike. Thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank Afcea for hosting the event and allowing me and the panel to come today to talk to you about Task Force Cybersecure. Before I delve into some of the things that have been going on with the task force and where we're headed, I'd ask the panel members to just introduce themselves. Jeff, Chris, and Gary have all been participating, have been key members, have been the left and right legs and brains behind the cybersecure task force. As with anything in cyberspace and the operations, it requires a full team effort. So these guys are definitely part of the cyber team in our Air Force. I'd ask the guys to introduce themselves here real quick.
So Jeff Stanley, I'm from SAF AQR, which is the science, technology, and engineering leg of the acquisition arm. We mainly deal with the system engineering approach to cyber resiliency for our weapon systems.
Hi, Chris Colliver. I'm a technical advisor for ISR and acquisition intelligence. Sounds like nothing to do with cyber, but it is at Air Force Lifecycle Management Center as far as supporting PCAM on the under Task Force Cybersecure and the Cyber Campaign Plan, the lead for intelligence for cybersecurity, not only for LCMC, but also for SMC and Nuke Weapons Center.
Yep. I'm Gary Salmons. I lead the Crypto and Cyber Systems Division here at Lackland. So we have 4 of the 7 Air Force weapon systems that we developed for the 24th down here and the 25th. And then we also support the majority of the crypto equipment that's currently in the DoD and Air Force inventory.
Okay, thanks, guys. So a little broad brush on what Task Force Cybersecure is. So for those of you who aren't familiar, so it is actually everything that General Harris talked about in his speech today. About a year ago, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force signed out a memo that stood this thing up, this task force, to look at cybersecurity, mission assurance of Air Force core missions. Prior to that, my job as the Senior Information Security Official and Deputy Director for Cyber Ops under then General Basla, it was apparent to me that we were, and this is almost 3 years ago, I was having extreme challenges trying to figure out the vulnerabilities of our mission systems. Lots of activity in the Air Force with regards to cyber incidents. Lots of things in the public arena in terms of cyber threats and vulnerabilities. A heartbleed comes to mind right away. The Air Force was very focused on networks. We have hundreds, thousands of airmen, civilians, contractor, that really know in the AFNet business on NIPRNet, SIPRNet. They can defend and secure like I don't think anybody else can. But when it came to questions about the mission systems and weapon systems platforms, not so good. So we had to get at this problem, because if we didn't, we'd probably be in a world of hurt. So we stood the task force up in March. It's an enterprise-level team delivering solutions or recommendations to increase the robustness and resilience of Air Force core missions, quite frankly, and everything you've heard this morning from the Secretary to ACC. So when we first embarked on this journey, we wanted to prove, as with any new entity, we wanted to prove our worth, right? We set out to do some near-term initiatives. We got about $10 million from the Secretary, say, start fixing things. So initially, we were focused on fixing some near-term initiatives, some things that we definitely wanted to get at based on some incidents that have occurred within the Air Force. So one of the things we did was immediately try to look at some of the things that we could do to secure weapon systems platforms. One of the things that we started honing in on, and Jeff is going to talk more about this, was the Cyber Campaign Plan. The Cyber Campaign Plan was a plan that the LCMC folks, SAF-AQ, AFMC had started actually before the task force had started to look at how do we make our weapon systems secure and resilient. So we threw some money, we funded some near-term initiatives to help them jumpstart some of these things, like digitally signing operational flight programs, secure portable maintenance aids, things that we could start doing to address the cybersecurity of weapon systems platforms. The talking point then was we spend literally millions of dollars on securing our email. We digitally sign it, we encrypt it, we protect email and look for things, but when it came to some of the basic security things for weapon systems platforms, it was not up to the level that we felt that it should be based on things that were going on in the wild and within the Air Force. So as we progress in the task force, we are here today to talk about some things. We've pushed some operational concepts forward with the help of the entire team, and I must stress that the task force was a venue and an entity where we brought all the cyber experts across from the Air Force to include OSD and some Cybercom and Joint Staff folks to address mission assurance of weapon systems. So we push forward some of the things, quite frankly, that were kind of cookie cuttered from the AFNet. So if you think about how we defend the AFNet, you walk into an ops center and it's frankly a world-class operations center that's focused on networks and some mission systems. We wanted to get at that problem for mission systems, so we supported some initiatives out of Space Command, out of 50th Space Wing, led by Colonel Jason Sutton, on something he called a network monitoring pilot, which was getting at the security and defense of a particular mission system, weapon systems platforms, namely Air Force Satellite Control Network, GPS, and SIBRs. So as he was fleshing that out, we thought that was a good idea, so we kind of put some effort behind it. We hired some fast movers in Deloitte under Irv Lessel and wanted to progress some sort of the ConOps on how this could be done for mission systems. So that was pushing forward. We've supported Comstrata Next, looking at tactical level folks at the wings to do some basic mission assurance and cybersecurity at the wings missions. We've looked at possibly looking at other models in terms of, you heard the Secretary talk about persistent attack, the Pentagon hacker for hire. So thinking about how we could approach those kinds of concepts around mission systems platforms. So as a CISO, I'm inundated with a lot of things that are kind of certification accreditation related, but I think we want to move to more of a certified credit, leave it alone, and then we'll revisit another year. We're looking more at an active defense model in terms of within our most critical enclaves. And so some of the things that we're pushing forward. The last thing I do want to mention before turning it over to the panel members is we've done a lot of work with some innovation kinds of things. Supported some initiatives the 24th and Space wanted to do, and that was particularly the rollout of the automated remediation asset discovery system, which is going to be deployed here April 4th. We've tried to push some initiatives and innovation forward, utilizing the DIUX folks out of Silicon Valley and some of the things the cyber campaign plan's looking at. So trying to tie everything into a knot moving forward. What's the future of the task force? Well, we believe the task force will sunset at some time, but General Bender wants to turn over the reins to an enduring framework. We believe it is perhaps an office dedicated to this mission under the Chief Information Security Officer. Currently, the CISO, for those folks out there who used to be the Air Force CISO, was more beyond just looking at CNA packages and certifying them. It's more of an active role into looking at how we can secure and defend the missions of the Air Force and how we can improve that beyond reviewing packages and signing off on them. So more to follow on the CISO construct to make it more of an active, more robust kind of entity for our Air Force. So that's in a nutshell where the task force is going. I'll turn it over to the panel members to explain their piece of this thing. Jeff Stanley has a huge piece, which he's going to explain to you right now.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, in my role as SAF AQR, I'm in charge of leading the weapon system cybersecurity. And when I say weapon systems, I think General Harris had a chart up there that kind of broke the defense of our Air Force enterprise into kind of three domains: the networks, the infrastructure, and the weapon system. I'm focused on that third piece, that weapon system piece, that being the aircraft, ICBMs, weapons, support equipment, those kind of non-traditional, non-IP-based systems that we have in the Air Force that accomplish our mission sets. We found out over the past couple, 3 years that our weapon systems have revealed some susceptibilities to the cyber threat. In order to combat that, we started a weapon system cyber campaign plan comprised of 7 lines of action. The Secretary noted this morning that we spend about $4 billion on cybersecurity, and a very small percentage of that is gone to weapon system cybersecurity. That's going to change coming up starting in 17 here. We're dedicating more than $1 billion to improving our weapon system cybersecurity over the Air Force enterprise. As I mentioned, we have 7 lines of action that we're executing right now to improve the resiliency of our weapon systems. I'd like to just briefly touch on what those 7 lines of action are, except one of them, which I'm sure Chris will talk a little bit more about when he talks here in a second, because he's in charge of the last line of action. The first line of action is our mission threat analysis. And this is a really important step in trying to figure out where the risks to our Air Force missions are. We currently have 42 different Air Force missions in the Air Force. Those missions are comprised of a lot of different systems to allow us to execute that personal recovery mission, or that deep strike mission, or that ISR mission. What we try to do is break down, functionally decompose each one of those mission sets to find out where our risks from cyber exist. That way we can apply the right resources and the right amount to fix enterprise problems that we have across our mission set. Our second line of action is really to bake in cyber system security into our whole acquisition process. And that's mainly done through our system engineering process that we use in the Air Force. It starts obviously with requirements, which are a very key piece, but it continues throughout the 9 technical reviews that we do on each one of our weapon systems developments within our Air Force. Our third line of action is all about developing, recruiting the workforce. I think the Secretary talked about some of the initiatives this morning that we have to bring in the right kind of cybersecurity warriors that we need in the military side as well as the civilian side. Currently, we're kind of going through what's the right amount or right development path for cybersecurity experts within the acquisition field. Do you have to grow up as a SME in terms of an acquisition SME, or a functional SME like a radar SME, and then become a cybersecurity guy? Or do you have to be a cybersecurity guy and learn that other function in order to prevent our weapon systems? It's kind of a debate we're going through right now, and obviously there's a lot more to it when we talk about trying to hire and retain the right kind of talent within our Air Force. The fourth line of action is all about adaptability and agility, applying that open mission systems, open system architecture concepts to our weapon systems to allow us to easily and efficiently upgrade both the hardware and software we have in our weapon systems. If you think about weapon systems that are going to be out there on the flight line for 40 and 50 years, we have to make sure we have a way to adequately upgrade any deficiencies or vulnerabilities we find in those weapon systems. Line of action number 5 is all about creating a common security environment When we talk about susceptibilities or vulnerabilities, obviously we get into classified areas real quickly, especially when you're talking about how they affect the ability of a platform to do its mission. And we don't always talk at the same levels throughout our Air Force or within the Department of Defense. We're working very, very heavily with the whole department to define a security construct that we can all agree with and we can all talk at the same level and share best practices with. LOA 6 is about assessing and fixing our legacy fleet. 80 to 85% of the equipment that we have out there on the flight line is going to be out there for the next 20 years. We need a way to look across those platforms and systems and fix the susceptibilities that we know we have out there through the assessments that have been done through developmental tests or operational tests. Fix those systems first and do it in a way that we're not spending the national debt to do so. LOA 7 is all about integrating intelligence into all the rest of those LOAs, whether it's the upfront requirements piece, the system engineering piece, whether it's really understanding the threat, and that's all about Chris Colliver, and he's in charge of LOA 7, so that's, I think, a good handoff for him to start talking about that.
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff said, the last line of action 7 in the cyber campaign plan, the number isn't so relevant, but it's about what we're trying to do. And of course, everybody says intelligence, oh, it's immediately classified. Well, it is and it isn't. And I'll touch on that briefly. But our real goal within that line is to enable the collection, analysis, and eventually that application of intelligence for cyber systems, weapons systems, cybersecurity. And of course, a lot of that is traditional, the traditional black art of intelligence and how that's done. But a lot of that is looking for innovative ways to really enable that. You look at, and especially this community is probably very aware of work that companies, Mandiant has done on the advanced persistent threat, Cylance has done recently. And so there's a lot of opportunities to really find what is out in the open. It's not a mystery, or it's not a secret that an adversary necessarily is trying to keep from you, but it is something that is forensically discoverable. You just have to know to go there and discover it. And so in that innovation for trying to understand what is the threat, the Secretary this morning talked about the cost capability analysis, bending that cost curve. Intelligence, hopefully done well up front, allows us to better spend our money, whether that is spend more to get the benefits later, or you can spend a little bit, but you need to spend it later on because perhaps the threat just isn't there yet. And part of my responsibility is to make sure that we have adequately engaged the traditional intelligence community, the NSAs of the world, the CIAs, everybody that we know, and that is being done the same way that we would look at threats to any of our other domains in air and space. But then also try to build some more innovative partnerships with industry to better discover those things that are the threats that are there, but we just haven't looked to go find them yet. And I talked about those examples. Probably a little bit later on, maybe in some of the questions that you might have, we can go a little bit more into depth with some of those examples. I will point out one, though, which is very important, and some of you might be familiar with under the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, under OSI, there's an office called the Defense Cyber Crime Center, DC3, and they have a very good program. It's an excellent program called the Defense Industrial Base Collaborative Information Sharing Environment, the DIBC. And that enables government and industry to come together to share information about cyber threats. It's primarily network-based. And a lot of the companies that are here hopefully are members of that collaborative that allow that government to industry sharing about threats, so that both can be adequately informed to take care of their networks, their companies. Well, I think for weapons systems cybersecurity, we need to innovate and try to do that same thing. It's not just in the government's best interest to discover those threats and so that they are adequately taken care of early on, but it's also a lot of our weapons systems are based in industry technologies. You look at the airframe, you look at a lot of commonalities between government and industry there. You look at our KC-46 and it's what it's derived from. So there's a lot of benefits to ensuring that industry understands those threats so that it can bake in that resiliency up front, so that as the government purchases that type of technology, again, that cyber resiliency, it's already there. That's already taken care of. And that's something that hopefully under my responsibility with intelligence, I hope to enable. Colonel?
So as Mr. Kim said at the beginning when he started this challenge, it was put on his desk, he looked across the Air Force to see what capabilities were out there and what could be, applied to this new situation. And so in our organization, we have two capabilities that were applicable. The first was the public key infrastructure capability, which is basically, if you think of the DoD CAC cards, it's two-factor authentication. So how can that be applied to hardware or systems or an aircraft or anything else to basically keep that a little sealed in a way, if you think about it? The PKI was recently applied to the A-10 for their flight plans, and that was a pilot program on the Task Force Cybersecure, and it was applied there and it was successful. Also, one thing that Mr. Kim mentioned was the scorecard, which part of what you're doing is trying to make something enduring to the other weapon systems. And so what that did is the scorecard, when you're being measured, right, when your weapon system is being measured against different factors, that's something you're going to pay attention to. That has driven a lot of systems to us to look at PKI and see how it can be applied to their weapon systems or to things they're putting on their weapon systems. So it really drove good behavior from our perspective, because otherwise it probably, wouldn't have come down to us or looked at how PKI could be implemented in their weapon system. It just didn't rise to the level of importance as things have been put on cyber here lately. The second capability that we have is our Trusted Systems and Networks Office, which was recently designated an AFMC Center of Excellence for that purpose. And what they do is malware and microelectronics detection. So all the things that were brought up before about supply chain, hardware, software, that's an office that can look into all of those different products and see if there's any counterfeiting, if there's any malware there. If you would go to that office today, you would see COTS products on the bench that they're testing for malware that the Air Force is looking at. You would see hardware recognized by a technician that was putting something in a product and thought something looked a little weird. They have the capability there to look into that and see if it's counterfeit, and discovered quite a bit of counterfeit stuff, as you would imagine. What they did for the Task Force Cybersecure is they worked to instill that system security training language into training, as well as the new request for proposal language that the Air Force is using, so that that's put in every RFP that it applies to. So that, again, is another case of making what the Task Force Cybersecure an enduring thing that won't just go away when it transfers offices. And so those are the two capabilities that we provided to the Task Force Cybersecure at this point. And so far, from our perspective, most task forces get put together and people just wait for the taskers to come down and see what happens, and then hopefully it goes away in time so you can get back to work. But in this case, this was a task force that we have seen a lot of value come out of, and so we have great hopes that that the things that they've accomplished so far stay in the Air Force and don't go away.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I do want to stress the task force. We don't actually. Maybe I'm being a little. We don't actually do anything. We have. So Jeff agrees with that. Anyway, we actually. General Bender's been very clear. But before the task force was stood up, I mean, just this conference alone is amazing. We would not be having this conference 2 years ago or 3 years ago when I took this job. Cyber was not being talked about in the E-ring. In fact, in some instances, we're not encouraged to talk about cyberspace because cyberspace, don't know really what it is. We're the Air Force. We're about airspace superiority and the core mission. So let's not talk about cyber. But in the last year, I mean, this panel is a testament. We are starting more and more. I mean, it's amazing that J.D. Harris can talk about cyber. I mean, Air Combat Command. This is where we are in the Air Force today, and figuring out. The chief has established in and through and from cyber set of discussions, and we meet with him once a month, and we coordinate with all the major commands on operational concepts, cyber force application concepts, on how we think of the domain and how we want to utilize that to our advantage in support of our core missions in our Air Force. So with cybersecurity, I'm very heartened to see that a lot of people are paying attention. It is not just a task force, but folks across the Air Force that are contributing and moving this ball forward, because I like to see a day where, and these are the chief's words, we don't talk about cyber, but we're talking about air superiority, and cyber is just one piece of the pie that we just do in support of our air missions. So that's, I think, where we'd like to see cyber in the future. So there's lots of things that have to happen before now and then. I think this is a time in the panel I pre-questioned the guys. I already seeded some questions. So I'm going to ask Gary. He's actually being really bashful about the innovation that goes on in LCMC, but they've stood up the cyber proving grounds or cyber innovation thing. So if you want to talk to the audience, what is that and how does industry play in that?
Okay. Well, the secretary, for those who were earlier, her remarks were spot on things that the Air Force is doing to try to speed things up, right? So I'm an acquisition guy in charge of an acquisition organization. We're probably not the first thing that jumps to your mind when you think of the word agile or even innovative in some ways. So that's something that we had to change. And so coming to this job, I got to say, I didn't particularly like acquisition myself. Because I worked in many SPOs over my career, and I saw how slow it was, and I might be able to design the bolt for the landing gear of a fighter, and I might actually see a picture of it someday. There's not a lot of great feedback in acquisition. It's not that exciting, to tell you the truth. So I would always look for opportunities to go do something else. So when this job came along, and just the perfect timing. Acquisition was being forced to look at itself and say, you're not even relevant to the cyber discussion because you're too slow. We'll give you the stuff that you can do in 5 years, but you're really not part of the conversation or part of the solution. So what we've done is capitalizing on as the Secretary mentioned, the Cyber Solution Cell. We had a link with the 24th Air Force in that we would scan the industry and look at solutions, and then we would get the requirements from the 24th and Afcea, and we try to link them up and try to point them in directions, and it was a great teamwork effort. But now we're taking it to the next level here with the Cyber Proving Grounds, which one way to look at it is it's really bringing the capabilities that acquisition provides, there are good things, right? I laid out the bad things, but the good things about acquisition are the discipline of it, resources, right? They always talk about innovation without a resource is a fantasy, right? You got to apply those resources, and when you talk about resources in the Air Force, you usually end up in the acquisition offices one way or the other. That's where the money is. So how do you bring what we can bring to bear to the problem, along with the operators of the 24th and the requirements? as well as AFRL and other offices that work in cyber, all together in one place to basically be the single face of the Air Force for new cyber innovation. So what the Cyber Proving Ground will do is bring all of those communities together, sitting at a table like this or something like it, and in the front door, based on a request that we ask for, you're going to help us solve our problems. And we as the acquirers will sit right next to the operators and watch them prove your product and tell us what they think about it. You're going to get immediate feedback. We're going to hear from them if they like it or if they don't like it or if it needs more work or it's something we should look at in the future or it's a problem that there is no solution for and we can go to FRL or some similar vein to get them to solve the problem, and then we're going to move on. And that's some of the agility that we're going to build into acquisition. We're not opening the DoD 5000 Bible where it takes me 6 months to a year to do an RFI and an RFP because we've just made ourselves irrelevant by the time frame that the 24th wants their products. So as you can see, we're very excited about the Cyber Proving Grounds because one, we have the operators next to us that I think gives us a lot of relevance. But two, I think it really focuses our resources where they need to be applied. We have long POM processes and things that are just built into the Air Force that we have to look at 4 or 5 years, just like the Secretary said. We always have to have a plan, but maybe we can write that in a way to apply it to something like a proving grounds where we might not know what innovation that you as industry came up with, in the time we put that POM in, but we can still react to that as we see it presented at the Cyber Proving Grounds. So as you can see, there's a lot of excitement again, and we have some other ideas that people are looking at that we can also use the Cyber Proving Grounds for as well in the crypto world, as well as some other things that we do in my organization. So with that, we're very excited about some of the innovative opportunities that you're going to see coming out of the Cyber Proving Grounds here, and it'll be exciting to see what happens.
For Chris, how do you see, you mentioned commercial industry and leveraging that. How far or how are we planning to do some of that? I know you and I have talked about an open source entity that looks at publicly available intelligence. These vendors out here all talk to me, and they are sitting on literally millions of endpoints, and they know more about what's going on. I mean, they're basically commercial SIGINT out there, some of these companies. So where do you see that going in terms of intel for core missions?
Exactly. And so, back in, it must have been 1995, I did a paper on commercializing spaceborne SIGINT that's unclassified. And was there an industry available for actually having, paying for service for spaceborne capabilities to actually gather intelligence? And would that be sustainable? And however that went, and whatever it be, I think we're at a similar type of opportunity here. Is there an industry that can be spawned which sponsors the collection, analysis, and application of computer-type intelligence to enable cybersecurity, and whether that's on the IT side, because we've seen that on the IT side. I gave you a couple of examples with some of the excellent work that has been done on characterizing the advanced persistent threat from a network perspective. We're seeing some of that now. The capability to do that analysis on ICS SCADA with understanding, being able to actually go into a company, a provider, and understand what malware or what's been taken advantage of, what's been compromised within that ICS SCADA system. I think the same thing could emerge for weapon systems. So when we look at the large capability providers, airframe type providers for whether it's Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, but also on the space side. We've got tremendous infrastructure vulnerabilities. Space launch can be a very susceptible target. And we need to understand that side as well is cyber secure. And so I've got one of these slides that when I go out and brief, I've got three people on it. It's a pilot and there's two console operators, the people who are flying our satellites, and then our cyberspace pilots, I call them. And that's really who we're serving out there. And we have to keep them in mind, because their mission success, that mission assurance, is really where we're going. And I think that there's an ability for us to spawn a capability for industry to be able to not only that endpoint collection, points of presence, to understand what that threat really is, what it looks like, crowdsourcing the threat, but then also on the weapon system side, to be able to understand, from some of our commercial derivatives, whether it's ADS-B or ACARs or any of those types of capabilities that are out there, looking at vulnerabilities, but also looking at cyber systems that have natural immunity. And I refer to direct sequence spread spectrum as something that has some natural immunity. Sure, it was designed as kind of an anti-jam type system, which it does very well, but it's also got inherently good tracking on it. So when you have systems that have some natural immunization to them, it really helps the resiliency piece. And so if we can begin to go down the line, I think that's probably, Pete, some of the conversation today that we've seen on Windows, developing from whatever it used to be to 3.1 through Vista 2000 to now, what the Air Force is doing with Windows 10, you begin to see that resiliency and mission assurance baked in to the systems. And if we can begin to do that, and from a commercial standpoint, when we're designing systems, whether it's for a commercial application or a military application, that certainly makes the product much, much better. And I think we, on the government side, have a partnership in that to be able to inform better on what we see on the threat side. That just makes the products that you provide better to ultimately the customer. So that's one example. There's a much longer conversation we can have on that.
All right, thanks, Chris. And one more question for Jeff, good friend here. So at dinner last night, we talked about the challenges of the cyber campaign plan. So what's one of the biggest challenges you've encountered since taking this on here for the Air Force?
Well, besides working with you, and I say that jokingly, but this isn't a 6 problem, right? When we talk about weapons system cybersecurity, this isn't the traditional A6 CIO problem. As we develop weapon systems in the future, as we support them today, I think culturally we're going to have to think about this problem a lot differently. And I think that's a huge challenge. We can't just apply these monolithic IT policies that we have out there to our weapon systems, because they just don't fit real nicely. We need to tailor them with the risk to the mission that system is comprised of. And it's a different way of thinking. I know you've been in the same meetings that I have, where someone from a CIO's office would stand up and say, "Hey, we have to put CAT card readers on every system we have." Well, General Harris isn't going to jump in that F-22 and throw his CAT card in there. Okay, we need to think about this differently. And a lot of times it's sometimes not those big systems like the F-22, but that support equipment, or those things that connect to the support equipment, that are going to give us problems in getting that launch of the F-22 off and doing its mission. So we have to think about this problem differently, and it's really going to take everybody, from the maintainers on the flight line, thinking about this problem differently. When you go out to the flight line and a maintainer has his maintenance laptop out there with the password with a yellow sticky on it, he's got to think about that differently. To the guy do the mission planning system, and maybe getting data off the World Wide Web and downloading it to his mission and planning environment, to the guys that are developing that system or doing the information assurance and compliance differently. It's going to take a cultural mind shift from our whole enterprise of how we view this problem differently, because it's an insidious problem, it's a complex problem, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
No, I agree with that assertion. Yeah, he and I had dinner last night, talked about this. I think the crux of the thing that we talk is the people. And one of the things the task force is focused on is the instilling the cyber culture in the airmen. The Safety Center has been doing a lot of work with the Cyber Assure. You'll see more of that here in the next month or two, and rolling that piece out of the task force. But the cybersecurity for weapon systems and mission assurance should cause people out there in the field to pause and ask themselves, is this really the right solution for this particular problem set? Applying Windows 10 replacements across the board to all mission systems may not be the right solution. It may be something else. It may be a Linux solution, or maybe not doing anything. One of the things the task force is that I've seen is we're in a place with cyberspace that I don't think we've ever been at, and it's now trying to bridge that gap from what we know as the AFNet, and we've grown a lot of some really fantastic people in that world, and they're sitting out there in the ABUs, and we've grown some squadrons that are experts in this field: INOS, 33rd, 26th, 92nd. But now we're entering a phase that we're still trying to find our way through, is called the mission assurance of these weapon systems platforms. And we can't, one of the things me and Jeff argued about, and we had a Texas cage match, it was, not really, the 92nd is not going to go hunt inside the F-35 avionics operational flight program. That's just, whoever said that in the meeting, that's not true. That's not the point of the exercise. I think the point of the task force was to look at this thing, this cyberspace issue and challenge, and think through the right ways to address the cybersecurity challenges of the day, knowing what we know, what the adversary does to us right now. You can't pick up a paper without knowing what our adversaries are doing to a commercial industry, what they're doing on our networks. Their TTPs are well documented. We know what they're going after. Okay, so we need to apply the right operational risk framework to not just the AFNet, but also to our weapon systems. So we are still working towards that and finding the right solution. Is it NOSCs or SOCs for all our weapon systems platforms? Is it persistent hunt, cyber vulnerability assessments, a 33rd Network Warfare Squadron or Cyber Squadron that's multiplied 5 times across AFMC for the different weapon systems platforms? We're still Com Squadron Next. We are still working through those things. But the ultimate goal, I keep telling folks, and I'll tell the airmen, is we have to answer that operator's question when there's things going on and the fighter pilot is coming to you and going, is my stuff still safe? Can I still execute the air war? Is the AOC and the C2 and the ISR, is that all still good to go? I need to know. And I know we're really good at telling the fighter pilot what boxes have malware on it. That, quite frankly, is interesting. Someone's trying to signal me to shut up. But not relevant, because we have to translate everything we know into the mission. Because I've sat in the vice chief's office, and he doesn't want to hear how many boxes have malware on it. He wants to know if the mission there's some integrity, confidentiality, surety, he can conduct his missions. So that's where we need to go for our Air Force. So the chief is behind that. There's going to be a Corona session in June on that. So more to follow on that. So with that, I think we're done, right? We gotta answer questions. So if you have questions, you've been emailing questions and someone's beeping at me. So I don't know who's going to ask questions. I can ask another question if you want.
The first question is a multi-part question. Training and certification events such as CyberFlag seem to be excellent opportunities to integrate your lessons learned into training opportunities, CyberFlag, CyberGuard, etc. Have you moved your lessons learned to this level of cyber operations? Is there an opportunity to shift thinking at the keyboard operator and joint force component commander levels? Finally, are you translating lessons learned to allies and partners?
That's a question for me, I think. You want to answer it? So we've doing a lot of participation in CyberFlag and CyberGuard. CyberGuard is a particular exercise we do with the Guard. DHS is involved as with Cybercom. So all the cyber folks involved in cyber are at CyberFlag. CyberFlag has focused a lot on particular scenarios. There's been lots of lessons learned from those exercises. I think in particular was the one finding, I think 2 CyberGuards ago or CyberFlags ago, that the DoD information networks are actually a core capability for warfighting, which was interesting finding because we don't necessarily think of networks as a core capability of warfighting, but they are. I know we're talking about weapon systems, but when we're talking about the DoDIN, what we know as the DoDIN, and everything that hangs off the DoDIN, you're talking personnel, medical, logistics, finance. All those things are very vulnerable too, so we want to think about mission assurance of those things too. So lots of findings out of those exercises feed into the operational art of cyberspace operations, and folks in 24th and 25th are incorporating those lessons learned. I forgot the second part of the question. In terms of the JFAC or CFAC, that is why we exist. That is why we exist, for air superiority. And I can't stress that enough because the chief stresses that every time we meet with him. Everything we do is in support of the CFAC. So this cyber force application concept that General Kevin Kennedy, who's my boss for the cyber ops director at the headquarters, is running the Air Force-wide effort for the chief on terms of how are we going to position cyberspace operations in the future in support of the core missions, and how does that enable everything that we do in the Air Force. And so there's lots of discussion on that and more to follow on that. So I hope I answered your question on that. Oh, the lessons learned. I think the lessons learned get rolled back into, I don't know if there's a 24th guy here, but the lessons learned gets rolled back into refining TTPs, refining concepts of how we do things, whether they're offensive or defensive, and how we actually partner with the interagency. So one of the most important pieces of cyber, and that's why the guys are here, is this is a total team effort between the Department of Defense, the Air Force, DHS, FBI, OSI, I mean everybody, Cyber Command, the other services. In fact, I meet with the Navy's task force, Troy Johnson. We used to meet every week or every couple weeks, but sharing information. Jeff's been in those meetings, talking about what they've learned from their task force and how we can apply those to the Air Force. So there you go.
How do we balance baked-in cybersecurity with open architecture requirements mandated by BBP 3.0? Can industry get example templates of the cyber vulnerability scorecard so they can proactively bake in security?
So I think there was a few questions there. The first question had to deal with how we bake in cybersecurity with open system architecture. I think that was the first question. So I think we're doing this pretty successfully on a number of different programs. Part of the Open Mission Systems specification is a whole chapter on the security controls that that specification has with it. We're building system security engineering into the Open Mission System specification so that the systems that we build in the future are more resilient and have the hooks in them to really bake in cybersecurity. Second half of the question
What was the scorecard?
was about scorecard.
It was about the scorecard. So the DoD Cybersecurity Scorecard is a SecDef initiative. We measure some basic cyber hygiene things in that scorecard, everything from PKI-enabled systems to patching your systems, web servers in the DMZ, some basic cybersecurity things. So it's an exercise we're going through every Friday with the DoD CIO, and we partner very closely with 24th Air Force and the rest of the MAGCOMs and PEOs to satisfy those taskings in that cybersecurity scorecard. So.
And we're just now starting to apply them to
Mission
to
systems.
weapon systems and mission systems. And, you know, the scorecard, the criteria that each of the scorecards use were PKI enabled.
Yeah, we've got a
They're going to be tailored for
Right.
the specific weapon system domain that they're applied to.
Right. Got it.
The resources required to build in resilience for weapon systems may be tied to your ability to demonstrate mission assurance. Is this a correct assumption? And if so, how are you addressing this measurement challenge?
I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Can you ask the question again?
The resources required to build in resilience for weapon systems may be tied to your ability to demonstrate mission assurance. Is this a correct assumption? And if so, how are you addressing this measurement challenge?
Well, I think it's definitely, there's a relationship there. We could spend our whole Air Force TOA on fixing weapon systems. The question is how much do we fix to get to an acceptable level of mission risk for our weapon systems. And that's really the purpose of our mission threat analysis we're doing under LOA 1 is to try to really characterize the risk that all the systems have to produce that one mission that the Air Force has. In terms of measurements, how do we measure how well we're doing? That's a really interesting question. And I know we've had RAND, MITRE, and a number of the FFRDCs trying to help us coming up with measurements that'll allow us to measure how good we're doing or how well we're doing. I don't have a specific measurement right now.
Yeah, that's a tough question to address and solve. But I always say that you do the best you can with defense in depth with the resources you have. But I think at the end that you're going to need, if it really matters to you, whether it's a database or an AOC or name something that you really care about, you need to put some people with eyes on that target and some active defense. You really need some folks on the ball that can institute those measures and defend and secure that asset around the clock. So however you do that with technology or with people, it depends on the resources, because assume that something will happen. That's why I tell when Bill Marion was doing his cyber hardening thing, he isn't half A1, some of you know Bill. Assume you will get attacked. Assume you will get compromised. So what now? So he led an exercise within the A1 on some personnel systems and fleshed out some operational concepts for defense for Afcea. So that was fruitful, and I think he's going to be stepping out on some of the solution sets. So anyway,
Yeah, I would say, just from my perspective, we recently had a visit from Larry Welsh, for the ISAG, looking at S&T, and he had a couple of quotes that I liked. One was, when you look at the goal, or you set a requirement or a goal for the Air Force to achieve, you're not going to get there in a single leap. So his thing is, you're just going to, like air superiority is what he used as an example. You're not going to get air superiority with one quick hit. It's going to be small steps that happens over decades and decades that get you there. So to your question about mission assurance, I think if that's the ultimate goal, there's going to be so many little steps that have to happen in the meantime, some of which we don't even know what the question is, like where the threat will come from. We'll take that on and we'll keep stepping toward the ultimate goal of mission assurance. So to answer your question, I would say no. We can't necessarily 100%, say mission assurance is assured, but our goal is to get there. I mean, in the 40s, would we have said, nobody will even think about launching an aircraft against us. In fact, they'll probably bury their own airplanes versus trying to launch against the United States Air Force. Would we have the pride or arrogance to say that in the 40s? No, that was our goal. But in a way, in a lot of ways, we've achieved that with our aircraft. What nation wants to launch against an F-22? Not many, because they'd probably lose their assets. So that's the same kind of thing we're going to have to do in cyber, and I think it's going to be a lot of little inch stones that'll get us there in the long run.
yeah, good. So it's all not about, I think you touched on a little bit, it's not just about security, it's also maybe talking about the cyber attack offensive side that provides that mission assurance. So I know the chief has been clear about that. It's not just about security, but how the full spectrum of cyber operations contribute to mission assurance, and it's not always defending yourself. So that's part of Task Force Cybersecurity that I normally don't talk about, so we'll just stick with security. So other questions?
What is the priority of cyber defense for PMO-managed weapons systems that execute tactical missions for Homeland Defense, such as the Battle Control System Fixed?
So we have a NDA language out there, NDA in 1647, that asks the service to prioritize their weapon systems so that Congress can make sure that we're doing the right assessments on our cyber assessments on our weapon systems. We've been against prioritizing our weapon systems, whether that's our aircraft or our IBM. I mean, you could argue that our nuclear enterprise is our most precious resource in the Air Force, and those systems should be prioritized first. Instead, we've taken a tact of looking across the different cyber assessments we've done over the past 4 or 5 years, which amounts to about 100 different assessments. And we've noticed a trend, and General Harris showed the wheel. We call it the Wheel of Doom. That was derived from those 100 assessments that we've done on our different weapon systems. And they fall in those general characteristics as those wheels shown. And that's where we've focused our attack, our thrust of putting resources against fixes to those common susceptibilities that we've found so far. So instead of prioritizing one to end, we've taken an enterprise approach to looking at common susceptibilities we have across our weapon system fleet, and then fixing those common susceptibilities.
Cool. Maybe a question for Chris.
Thanks.
Is there a question for Chris? Can you read one off? Whoever that is that God? I don't know who that is.
I can ask myself one.
Ask yourself a question.
Actually, I'll comment, since Pete's got the wheel and it came up. For those of you who who were here for General Harris's briefing this morning. And so those were really good slides. That wheel is, take that wheel and really look at it, because I know while my effort is a supporting effort for the cyber campaign plan, that wheel means a lot to us, because when you look in on it, everything is there if you pay attention to it. The attack surface, defining the attack surface, it really needs to be defended. The adversary, not only the general threat vector, but the specific TTPs and weapon system that may or may not exist on the outside of the boundary, the protective sinew that has to protect that system, everything is there. And that's another thing that we really need help with. These systems are very, very complicated, and it's not just about the onboard platform. It's the offboard systems, the networking and infrastructure, everything that goes into that platform and its operations for the pilot is very difficult. And then, part of my job is to figure out not only what is there from an adversary capability, but sometimes we don't know what is actually there. In the news, it is said that only 1% of what we actually know gets reported. The rest of it stays in a database somewhere from an intelligence perspective. So we have to sometimes rely on engineers who know the art of the possible with a little bit of intel knowledge to say, you could do this if you only knew how to. And that helps increase the resiliency of our systems, so that we know, well, there's a self-induced susceptibility because of risk-taking in our engineering design for cost, schedule, and performance, the triangle again in that briefing. And there's decisions that have to be made, but knowing that there's something that could be done, and then trying to figure out, okay, could it be done today? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? When is the adversary actually going to know that we have a susceptibility, and will they take advantage of that susceptibility? So that's kind of, Intel's job, is to figure out where in that 10, 20, 30-year time cycle is that spectrum of threat going to become apparent. And that's why I point out that wheel. So some of us actually, we live and die by that wheel, because we think it says everything to us. So if you didn't see the slides, get them, I guess.
Yeah, I got a picture of it.
We have time for one more question. How mature is the cyber proving ground? Is the process up and running, and are resources going toward accelerating solutions? Is there a central office that fields ideas and opens opportunities to come through the front door mentioned?
Okay, that wasn't one question. There's a lot of questions in there. So to get, General LeBrute is not here, right? Okay. So to get new space on Lackland Air Force Base takes 2 years. So we'll just put that 2-year timeline out there first. Well, so obviously we did not go that route. So I'm finishing up the lease on the facility here, should be the first week of April. Then we will, we're looking at, if many of you are familiar with the geekdoms or the AT&T foundries, or you've seen how they've kind of got a new model of how they lay out their dynamic type environment. So we're going to take that space, and then we're going to design it in that mold. How long that will take, I would think it would take a few months, obviously, but I haven't let the contract yet, so I can't give them the answer, right? So what we're doing now is we had a demo days with AFRL a few months ago. Right now we're proving out the process. So we had this demo day with AFRL, picked a few projects that we're going to transition that the 24th is interested in, and so we're proving out the process by doing it with AFRL projects. We're going to have a National Lab demo day with the 24th. They're looking at the first week of May. Our hope is that we can use the new facility, though it'll still be kind of under construction. Our hope is to have it in that facility. Then, I can't give you a month, but at least it's a month and it's not a year. But the goal would be this year, to go out and have our first industry challenge, where we go out with a discrete challenge, again, with the operators and an operationally relevant environment to test it on and then see what you got. And we're going to pick a challenge that we know some of you have products for, and we're going to test it out, and we're going to have the 24th tell us what they like, what they don't like, or what needs improvement, or what should come back in a year. So in that frame, I can't give you any specific dates, but it's moving fast, and that's the whole goal. And I got to foot stomp General Wilson. I don't think he's here now, but he's a major driver in that. He wants his tools looked at and developed and fielded. He wants to see solutions, in months and not years. So we're trying to use the same concept in standing up the Cyber Proving Ground. It's not something we're going to brief, and hopefully before you retire, you might see us do a ribbon cutting. We're hoping to have a ribbon cutting before General Wilson leaves, if that was announced, so he is leaving. So that'll be this summer. So our goal is to meet that. So hopefully that answers. It does have a sense of urgency. Resources, I got to say, we don't. Cyber is the cat's meow now, right? I mean, people want to play in cyber. People want to give money to cyber. People want cyber moved down the field. So as far as resources go, I think with the concept itself, I'm very confident the resources will be there because they have been so far.
Thanks, Gary.
That
Before
was
we-
our final question for the
before we
panel.
leave, I'd like to thank Afcea and Mike Warlick. Mike's been fantastic trying to keep us in line, and I think he and I have shared, 100 emails over the last month on this thing. So thanks, Mike, for keeping us straight. Hoorah.